Good evening, friends, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ginny Thornburg, and I welcome you to the forum on behalf of my husband, Dick Thornburg, director of the Institute of Politics. Women constitute 53% of this nation's population, and we want, beginning with this effort and other efforts across the nation, to make sure that all of the talents, all of the energy, and all of the experience of these fine citizens are used to benefit society. Our goal tonight and our continuing goal at the Institute of Politics is to increase the pool of women candidates who are willing and able to assume leadership roles in our communities and our nations. In short, we need more women candidates. Your moderator this evening is Susan Scher. She is a former president of the Massachusetts League of Women Voters and presently sits on the National League of Women Voters. She has special knowledge and interest in environmental issues and in tax reform. She will be coordinating the Institute of Politics' effort to establish a clearinghouse for women. Susan Scher.
Thank you. The purpose of tonight is to have before you some outstanding elected women. We hope that all women who are elected are outstanding. We certainly have 3 of them with us tonight. I do want to make this announcement first, that on the posters and the announcements for this evening's panel, Joanne Collins was announced, who is a city councilwoman from Kansas City, and at the last minute she was unable to be with us, which gives us more time with these women, so I'm delighted that we will have them to full advantage. Tonight's forum is about women's personal perspectives on running. Some of you might ask, what is different about a woman running than a man? But there are differences, and I'm sure you'll hear about them tonight, and I hope you have questions about that. We're going to allow our speakers to talk briefly to us, and then I hope we can open it up to lots of your good questions. And our first speaker tonight is Catherine Wittmeyer. I don't know how many of you have ever had to manage a relationship of 2, a family of 4, a small business, or just a number of friends. Catherine Wittmeyer is the mayor of Houston, 1.8 million people. This is no easy management task. And she came to that, as many women do, through the ranks, having first been elected to the job of city controller. She had a very strong financial background and then was able to become the mayor of this large city and is now in her 3rd term. Catherine?
Thank you very much. Do I have this mic on? I believe I do. Okay. Well, let me say, first of all, the most exciting thing to me about being here tonight is having a chance to get to meet these 2 exciting new mayors who are sitting here with me, because it was less than 3 weeks ago that I got up the day after my re-election, which for the first time was not a real exciting affair, since all of my other election campaigns have been so hard fought. This one was a little bit easier, and I got up and was looking at my newspaper and read about the new mayors who were elected, the new women who were elected as mayors in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Hartford, Connecticut. And I said, oh, how exciting, because I have made it my business to kind of keep tabs on the women who serve as mayors in the major cities. And in fact, a few years back, joined with Dianne Feinstein of San Francisco in creating a new organization called the National Conference of Women Mayors, so that we might keep in contact with each other and perhaps learn from each other's problems and mistakes and share each other's concerns. So I was very excited to see these 2 new women joining our ranks, particularly knowing that we keep losing the ones we have, as my dear friend Dianne Feinstein will be going out of office at the end of the year, in that their city charter prohibited her from running again. I was excited to get to know them and to perhaps share some perspectives with all of you on what it has been like, not only to be a candidate for mayor 6 years ago and for city controller 10 years ago, as a woman in a very large city, now the 4th largest in the nation, but also what it's been like to serve as mayor of that city and the attention that has come to us. Now, you know, a lot of people have a lot of ideas about Texas, and I know there are a few Texans here in the audience, and I'm glad to see you here. But of all the things people know about Texas and think about Texans, one of them is probably not the fact that we are the only state in the nation where the two largest cities both have elected women as their mayors. Last April, Dallas, Texas, elected Annette Strauss as its mayor, the first time that city had ever had a woman in the top elected position. So now Houston and Dallas, as the two largest cities, both are led by women, and most people outside of Texas think that's a little bit unusual. And then when we tell them that also Corpus Christi and Galveston, Texas, two of our great resort areas, also have women mayors, and there are quite a few others across the state, they are even more surprised and wonder just what it is that we have going on down in Texas. On the other hand, things have not really changed for women, because I must tell you that after 6 years in office, this morning before I left Houston, one of the things that I did was to pose for a fashion photograph for our local newspaper that wanted to do an update fashion story on what it is that the professional woman is going to be wearing next year, and felt that it was absolutely essential that the mayor had to be the cover story. And I guess that's some of what I want to tell you about, is what's different about running as a woman. Well, from a political perspective, there are several advantages and there are several disadvantages when you get ready to run for office and you are a woman. I happen to think there are more advantages. The advantages are that you get a lot more attention. The press pays a lot of attention to you. You get a lot more press coverage because you're different. You get more attention from the public because you're different. And in addition to that, you're usually able to get more volunteers, because there are a lot of women and men in this world who have looked around and have noticed that women do not hold a very large percentage of the elective offices in this country, and they're usually willing to get out and work and sometimes even contribute money to help change that situation. And I find that most women who are successful in politics usually do it by capitalizing on those two things: the extra attention from the public and the press, and the extra number of volunteers that women are able to accumulate in their campaigns. What are the disadvantages? Well, the one big disadvantage is that women still today have a harder time raising money for political campaigns than do men. The other disadvantage, of course, is that you get all that extra press scrutiny. So if you've got any problems, everybody's going to find out about them, and everybody's going to look you over very carefully, and perhaps more carefully, just to see if you can really do the job. So I think those are the disadvantages, but in the long run, I think the advantages certainly do outweigh the disadvantages. We did some polling some years back before my mayoral campaign to ask people, would you vote for a woman? Or really to find out how many people would vote against a candidate just because she was a woman, and how many would vote for a candidate just because she was a woman. And believe it or not, there are people on both sides. And the interesting part, although the percentages are very small, under 10% in both cases, most people make their decisions on other bases rather than just because she's a woman or not one. But there are a few more who will vote for a candidate just because she's a woman. And so there is a small advantage there, particularly when you have a string of candidates and people don't know who they are. If you're running for some kind of a down-ballot race and it's not getting a lot of publicity, sometimes people will look through that list and vote for the female name. That does still happen today, and you often see when there's one woman and a lot of men on a ballot that the woman will get an extra margin of votes for that reason. Some of the interesting things that have occurred have centered around this issue of fashion and the kinds of things. I said you get a lot of press attention. It's not always what you want. I was amazed that everyone wanted to focus on how I was going to wear my hair, and they wanted to know every detail, what I had for breakfast and what kind of pets I have. Of course, since I'm single, they had to know about my love life, and every detail about how I was going to look. Well, when I first ran for office, when I first ran for mayor, I was 34 years old, and I was quite concerned about maybe not looking quite mature enough for this office, and I went to some lengths to try to make sure that I looked very businesslike, and always wore the Dress for Success suits, and always wore my large glasses, and tried to be the image of the successful professional woman running for mayor. Well, this was all very nice, and I got elected, and people seemed to think that was just fine. But somewhere along the way, there was a movie that came out called Tootsie. And you know, I must admit the character in that movie did look somewhat like me. And everyone else noticed that as well. And there was a gentleman named Mr. Blackburn who publishes the list of the 10 worst dressed women in the world. And so that year, the number 10 spot was shared. It was a tie between me and Dustin Hoffman in his role as Tootsie. Well, this was during my first term, and I was running for re-election. We have lots of elections in Houston every 2 years. And so I was running for re-election right after I got this designation on the worst dressed list. And some of the folks who were anxious to get rid of me, and there have always been quite a few, put out some bumper stickers that said, "Toot, toot, tootsie, goodbye." And at any rate, some of my supporters finally got things moving and got things turned around our way. And we had our bumper stickers, too, and they were brown bumper stickers that said, "Tootsie's on a roll." And we passed out Tootsie Rolls at the polls that year. Well, that was... But after a couple of years of having Tootsie as the mayor, I must tell you the people of Houston got kind of weary of it. And when I got ready to run again 2 years later, and that time had an even tougher challenge from a man who had been the mayor for 10 years some time back, who came out of retirement to see if he could get rid of me, I decided it was about time that maybe Tootsie went away and we had a modern, updated image for the mayor of our modern, updated city. And so I started dressing a little bit differently, not quite as much in the dress for success mode, and I cut my hair shorter. And that seemed to be the biggest issue of the campaign. In fact, I couldn't believe I had been working very hard to get some positive national publicity for my city because Houston has been going through some difficult economic times. And so I picked up the Wall Street Journal one day during the campaign, and I'd really been trying to get the Wall Street Journal to write something nice about Houston, and they hadn't been cooperating. And I opened it up, and sure enough, there was an article about Houston. And it had some drawings, and they were before and after drawings of the mayor's hairstyle in Houston. This was what they finally could find to write about Houston, about how nice it was that the mayor had gotten a new hairstyle. But the headline on the story was, well, it would be too much to expect her to look like Jessica Lange. So I don't know. I guess the idea was that my appearance was somewhere between Dustin Hoffman and Jessica Lange. But we have always found that being a woman gives you many opportunities to do interesting things in the press. And I have to go back to my first campaign in 1981 to tell you the one that was the most fun. After a hard-fought election, we got into a runoff. The incumbent mayor that we were all running against didn't make it into the runoff. And my runoff opponent was the sheriff, 6'3", 60 years old. And he kept referring to me as that little lady. And we were trying to have a debate, and we couldn't quite get the sheriff to agree on the terms of this debate. And time was running out. And finally, we put out a full-page ad in the newspaper. His name was Jack Hurd, and the ad said, "Jack Hurd, come out and fight like a man." And it went over quite well, and he did manage to come to the debate, and we did win the debate, and we did win the election. So I think sometimes you can turn those things to your advantage. I'd like to just conclude with a couple of ideas about this business of women running for office and where we might go from here. You know, much of what we do doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we are women. All of this hoopla about, you know, we need to find out about her because she's different doesn't change the fact that as mayors of our cities, what we really have to be responsible for is trying to protect the health and safety of our citizens, see that the garbage gets picked up and that the police and the firefighters are doing their jobs and that we're planning for our long-range needs for water supply and transportation, and that we're trying to bring new economic growth into our communities. And while we're doing all these things, we certainly have a chance to represent the women and men of our communities. We also have a chance to serve as role models for other people and to create opportunities for other people. I mentioned that not long ago, the city of Dallas, just to our north, decided to elect a woman as mayor, and I had known her for a while since she had served on their city council. But I was so inspired the night of her election when I called her up to congratulate her as the new mayor of Dallas, and she said, "Well, Kathy, I couldn't have really been elected in Dallas if you hadn't been in office first, because the people here just really would never have believed that a woman could do this job if they hadn't seen a woman already doing it in Houston." And I think that an opportunity like that to be able to open doors and break down barriers for other people is something that's very special. But I want to point out something else to you. If you look at the 10 largest cities in this country, you will see that out of those 10 cities, 8 of the mayors are either women, or they are black, or they are Hispanic. 8 out of 10. Now, if you will look at the 10 largest corporations in this country, how many of them have chief executives who are women, or black, or Hispanic? So I think that perhaps tells you a couple of things. It tells you, number one, that maybe the voters are a little more progressive and a little more open to new ideas than are the boards of directors of those corporations, but it also tells you where the challenges are in the future. And I think perhaps that that's really what we need to look to. We've made some gains in the political world, and we need to see those gains carry over into the business sector as well. Thank you very much.
For your information, 20 years ago we would not have been here because there were no women who were elected to high office who hadn't earned that right by being married to someone who died in office. And so we have come a long way, but we have a very long way to go. And in that regard, one of the reasons why we had invited Joanne Collins to be here tonight is because she's a city councilwoman from Kansas City, and she is a black Republican. We wanted to show you that there are women in all corners of the political spectrum and representing all parties. I am personally delighted to have with us tonight Carrie Saxon Perry, who was the first black woman mayor of Hartford, Connecticut. Much smaller in size than Houston, but a difficult nut to crack. This 4-term state legislator, who currently holds the job of state legislator and mayor-elect, and that's all right for a woman, we always hold down 2 jobs, came here out of a sickbed. So we are looking forward to hearing from Carrie about her recent campaign of 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you. And I just hope you can bear with me a little bit. I still have kind of a strep throat, and so I'll be brief and pause so that I can be a little bit more prepared for the questions, which I'm always very excited about hearing from the audience, and why I made such an effort to be here in Boston, which is a neighbor of mine. As was just mentioned, I just completed an election November 3rd, and I shall be sworn in as the mayor of Hartford December 1st. So you see, I don't have much time to get it together. I didn't have much time to get my campaign together either. My perspective is that it's more than a notion running for a mayor of a city. And it has been an extraordinary journey for me. In June of this year, Mayor Thurman Milner decided that he was not going to run again. And he encouraged me to begin to think about running for that office. And after a lot of anguish and talking to friends and family, I decided to take the plunge. And that was about the beginning of July. And one of the things I had decided, knowing that I was a woman and that I was black, that it was not going to be easy. So I said the first thing that I would do was ask the Democratic Party for their endorsement. And that was a new experience for me. I had challenged the party 5 times as a citizen and as a elected official. So I said I would go the route to try to get their support, since I know it will be a very difficult election. And when I went to the leadership in the Democratic Party, which was all men, and approached them, and I said, I would like your support, and I would like your endorsement. I want to run for mayor of the city of Hartford. They said, well, Perry, what are you going to bring to the table? I said, I'm going to bring women to the table. They said, women don't support other women. You can't bring them to the table. Look what happened to Geraldine Farrar. She didn't get the women vote. So what else do you have? I said, I have women to bring to the table. And if you endorse me, I will show you. And so that was really a great challenge, and we disproved them, So they did endorse me, but it was difficult to get the endorsement because there was another man who wanted the position of mayor also. And so I had a very vigorous primary, and I did not get but maybe 5 more votes than he did to get the endorsement. So that was not a very strong mandate from the party that they were supporting me. So I had to develop my own organization to run citywide, because as a state legislator, as you know, you represent a geographical area within the city. You don't represent the entire city. So it's a much more parochial base. And so I had to revamp my whole organization and run citywide. So we did that. We won the primary. And then we had a challenger for the Republican, from the Republican Party, which was another good fight. And that was over, hallelujah, November 3rd. And that's probably why I can't hardly, speak now, because I have smiled and I have shaken hands and I have walked, the soles off my shoes. But I would not have traded the experience for anything. And the previous mayor who spoke talked about symbolism, and you can't really underestimate it as a woman candidate, what it does for other women, especially younger women who are thinking about public service. It's a beacon, and it's one of the things that kept me going when sometimes you just didn't know how you were going to make the next day, the next 23 and a half hours that you have to spend out there campaigning. I am ready for December 1st. There is a great many things that I will have to do. We have a system in the city of Hartford that is a dinosaur system of how you run a government, and it'll have to rely a great deal on positional power, more so than charter-given power, and it will test all the things that I've learned in my 7 years as a legislator to put to fore in dealing with the many men that hold some power within the city government. But I just look forward to it. Connecticut has a tradition of electing women to leadership positions. We had Ella Grassa, who was our governor. The last election, the Republicans ran Julie Balaga. So this is it's a state community in which there is an environment for women to excel in elected office, but there is still that reserve and that reservation about whether a woman can perform and excel as well. And it's sort of a dichotomy. In one way, you have the reservation, and then in the other way, you have high expectations. They expect you to be a miracle worker, to make things happen overnight. So these are the kinds of realities for which I have to deal. And I think back over the last 4 or 5 months, and I said, gee, how did I do it? How did we get it done? And it was a we. And every women's group in the state of Connecticut supported me, not only with monies, but also with volunteers. And it is true, it is still more difficult for women to get contributions and get the kind of financial support that men do. But it is getting better because women give you so much in-kind service that in that way it helps you with the financial cost of running a citywide campaign. So I'm looking forward. I am a mayor-elect. I will be a mayor in December 1st, and I was scared to death, and I'm still scared to death, but I do my best when I'm scared to death. So thank you.
Traditionally, women have done best when they can run for open seats, as Carrie did, but also those open seats cost a lot of money, and so raising the finances for a campaign are a very large factor. Our next speaker, Sue Merrick, who is a Republican from Charlotte, North Carolina, didn't wait for an open seat, but challenged a male person, and then also had to, well, we give him credit where credit is due, and was defeated the first time, and then chose to run again, which is very often what we have to do. You have to run once and lose and then try it again. And the second time she tried it, she had to run against a black Democratic male mayor. So we are breaking new ground all over the place, and I'd like to have you hear from Sue.
Thank you. Our race was a little unusual, I guess, in the sense that when we started, 6 months ago, everyone in our community and outside our community said that our mayor could not be beat. And most of the leadership in town had signed up on his side to support him because they felt he couldn't be beat. So I waited a while, and another 3 months or so, and finally, just in assessing the situation, and felt very strongly that there was an undercurrent of unrest out there that I could tap, and announced I was going to run. Well, at that point, everybody still said, "You're crazy, you can't do it, you won't be able to raise any money, he's the most popular mayor, and Charlotte's on a roll, and everything's wonderful, and there's no way." Well, we proceeded along course, and ended up, of course, winning. But I guess the interesting things along the way were the fact that traffic in our city was a main issue, and I knew that. I do a lot of market research in my business, and so it was something that, and keeping the finger on the pulse of the population is something I do every day. And that really became a key issue in the campaign. We talked a lot about traffic and the fact that we hadn't been addressing our road needs or our transportation needs in general to the extent that the populace thought we should have. My opponent said, well, we're spending more money this year than we've ever spent before, but to somebody sitting in a traffic jam every morning and late for work and the same thing in the afternoon, that really doesn't relieve it. So that was a key factor in the election. As far as running as a woman, you have to understand a little bit about Charlotte. It's a very traditional, conservative southern town. And it is large in population, about 370,000 in the city, 450 in the county, which are very closely integrated, even though we have separate governments. And you don't do things that are a little out of the ordinary or the unusual. It's very status quo, and you do things through the acceptable methods. So this is my fourth try at office. I ran the first time for city council at large against 4 male incumbents, and I only lost by 200 votes that time. And then the second time I ran for city council at large, I was elected. Then I ran in a primary for mayor and was defeated, and then ran again. But anyway, you try and stay within the norms of what's expected. And so part of that is not really running as a woman. You run as an individual. And we've got a great history, though, in Charlotte of electing women. But anytime anyone has tried really to be forceful and run as a woman on women's issues or whatever it may be, it turns everybody off. So I've always run as an individual, and I did again this time. But we had 6 females on city council, and this time we have 5. And we also have a female county commission chairman, who's a very good friend of mine, and she also happens to be a Republican. The other thing I didn't explain is our state is very heavily Democratic. Our city is 2-to-1 Democratic. So it's a little bit of a strange situation in the fact that we're able to get Republicans elected to office in Charlotte, North Carolina, but it's been an increasingly popular thing. We now have a Republican governor, too, which was something they said couldn't be done. But as far as being role models, I think there's no question but what you are, and you find, I guess, really more so than being on council, but when you're elected mayor, you're suddenly thrust into that position of other people coming to you and looking up to you. I guess in trying to encourage people to run for office, if you think you can do it, to me that's the most important thing, because if you have confidence in your own abilities, it really doesn't matter what you are. You can get your points across, and you can accomplish and achieve. And I think a lot of people sit back and don't do because they say, well, the deck is stacked against me, or this won't work right, or whatever it may be. And I haven't found that to be the case. I will say, relative to raising money, this was the easiest time I have ever had. I did not really have to go out and heavily solicit money and be in debt like I did before. Money came in very readily, and it didn't come from the large downtown business people. It came from what I call ordinary people like myself across the board, which was great. The only things that bothered me during the election and being female and running were two things. One, they would write reports in the press, and they wouldn't do this about my opponent. They never said he wore a pinstripe suit and a blue shirt and a red tie. But they'd say I had shoulder-length brown hair, and I had on a burgundy suit and a silk blouse and crystal beads, or whatever it might be, And this always tickled me, because why they had to describe the way I dressed, but never my opponent. The other thing, too, was after I was elected, the most asked question of me by the press was, does your husband tell you what to do? And it really got to a point where it got to be very aggravating for me. And finally, I was just saying, no, I'm blah, 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 and talking about my own merits. But I finally made up my mind that if one more press person asked me that question, I was going to say, would you ask me that if I were a man? Would you say, does your wife tell you what to do? Well, nobody's asked it since, so I haven't had a chance to use that. But I found it very interesting that was the approach that was taken, and it was taken that way pretty much across the board with the press.
I'd like to take this time to have the respondents reply to each other and make comments, but while they're thinking about what they might like to ask, the issue of image in the press is one that when I talk to the press about how the media deals with candidates, and in particular female candidates, they always say we treat them as candidates. Now, you've already heard from three women that that's not the case. And I'm wondering if anyone would like to comment further on that and how they think we can change that particular dilemma.
I would say just the fact that there are more females running, it's not going to happen overnight, because I think it's going to take a track record of more females running where it's more acceptable, where they can look at you more on an equal basis and not, single you out for these questions I talked about, being female, that are particular. When we can be accepted more as individuals straight across, I think then some of that will naturally fall by the wayside. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I really don't.
I agree. I think that until there are more women, we aren't such an oddity, and I'm sort of like a double oddity. So I got the double whammy with the press, and plus I wear a hat, so that's like a triple whammy, That they just constantly, they came the other day, they wanted to come into my house and go in my closet and take pictures. I said, hey, take a break, But I think what would be helpful too is that when there are more women who do the interviewing on the other side of the fence, and that they begin to ask about the very critical things and the important kinds of things we bring to the job, and I think that will be very, very important, that they begin to look at the women in the media, lead the way and say, hey, we want to know the kind of critical issues that you're going to deal with, and not necessarily what your blood type is and where have you been lately, socializing, and the kind of frivolous things that they take a great deal of your time with, and I think that will be helpful. But it won't be, I agree, it won't be anytime soon.
Well, let me say that we have a lot of women reporters in Houston. Women have moved along in the journalistic profession more quickly than just about any place else, and I haven't found the women reporters to be a bit better, quite frankly. I will say that I think that journalists, by and large, are doing their job, and their job is to tell people what they want to know about. At least they tell me that's what their job is. I mean, maybe their job is to try to tell people what they ought to want to know about, but they tell me that's not it, that they're really there to tell people what they want to know about. And just like people are curious about movie stars, they're curious about politicians, and they do want to know what you're wearing and why, and what about your personal life, and do what is your home life like, and where do you live, and who are your friends, and what are your hobbies, and all those kinds of things. And I think that's why they ask us, and I think they're going to keep on asking us as long as we're unique. And they're going to keep on focusing on the uniqueness about us as long as we are unique. And as Sue said, now that a large part of their city council positions are held by women, well, the women are not unique, and probably nobody's off focusing on what's special about all of these women council members. Half of our school board is made up of women, and nobody focuses on the fact that they're women and asks some interesting little questions. But there are just not that many women mayors, and that's why they're going to focus on us until there are more.
I just wanted to add one thing that occurred to me that's very, very much in my mind in our area. It's not this way everywhere. We have partisan elections in Charlotte. And so because of that, particularly when you're talking about women and women supporting women, I found this to be the case. Democratic women would not support me because I was a Republican, because of that partisan barrier that's very strong. I know that a good deal of them voted for me because they told me how they wrestled with the decision to vote for me. But they supported my opponent out front, and they worked for my opponent because he was a Democrat and I was a Republican. And I've said for a long time on my level, on local level, I wish we did have nonpartisan elections, because then some of that would be overcome both ways, not just relative to being female. But that's a very big dividing line in our community.
I wanted to follow up on Sue's comment about in her conservative southern city how she has to run as an individual instead of as a woman. It is true that I too live in a conservative southern city, and it is also true that I too run as an individual and not as a woman. It's an interesting thing about that. I don't suppose I have ever gone out and said that you really ought to support me for this office because it's time we had a woman mayor. That really didn't need to be said. All of the people who thought it was time we had a woman mayor and wanted to see a woman get an office and wanted to encourage that and work for that and contribute their money did so without me making that statement. And I think, quite frankly, that all of us as women in any cities, have to be running on the issues that are of concern to our voters, because every city has issues that have to be worked on, and that's ultimately going to be the platform that you have to address. You can't very well say, well, it doesn't, I don't really have any opinions on fixing the streets. You just ought to elect me because I'm a woman. And so I think that's probably true everywhere, that quite frankly, while a lot of us have gone out and worked pretty hard on the Equal Rights Amendment and the right to choose and those kinds of things, they're really not city issues, and we have to run on city issues when we're running at the local level.
Let me fan the flames on this a little bit, however, and that is that any candidate who walks in the room and is a woman is seen that she's a woman, and if you walk in the room and you're a black woman, you're seen as a black woman. So you don't have to talk about women's issues or sound like a woman. You are a woman. And in fact, Sue, when doing some research around all these campaigns, and you said that there are a lot of city councilors who are women, but wasn't there some backlash this time when they called them the Housewives Mafia, and they were trying to get them out?
They have done that periodically. In fact, that was big a couple of years ago. They said it was a Housewives Mafia. But in all honesty, it's kind of strange now, because really 3 of the women who were part of that group, 4 of the women who were part of that group, one of them was defeated in a primary race, and then the other 3 chose not to run for re-election over the last 2 years. Which
I was just wondering, when there is a woman, I was going to ask you, when there's a woman and there is a man, especially an incumbent, and you're challenging, did he take your race seriously? Did he give it his best shot?
He didn't take me seriously at all until about 3 weeks before the election, and by that time it was too late. It was an advantage. There's no question about it. Other people were starting to take me seriously, and some of his advisors were saying you should take her seriously. But he was so confident that there was no way, because everything was wonderful, we didn't have a bad economy, that he could be beaten. And it's a good lesson.
And when I challenged an incumbent, who of course was a man, I don't know how seriously he took it at the beginning, because he felt that I wouldn't be able to raise the kind of money that it would take to run the race, because campaigns in Houston do cost an extraordinary amount of money, more than they should.
How much?
Well, that particular year, he spent maybe $1.2 million and didn't make the runoff. I spent $500,000 getting into the runoff, and there were 3 other candidates who were spending quite a bit. One of them, the one who made the runoff with me, the good old sheriff, spent about $1.5 million just getting into the runoff. Enormous amounts of money are spent on those elections, as I said, more than they should be. And then after I spent this $500,000 getting into the runoff, I hate to say that in that short runoff I spent another $500,000 winning it. So we do spend a lot of money, and he originally thought I wouldn't be able to come up with enough money to really have a chance. To whatever extent he and his supporters took me seriously, it was because every time anybody took a poll, it showed that I was ahead. And they, ultimately they had to pay some attention to the fact that I was ahead, although they really thought that the money would overcome it in the long run. And of course, I will say, if the incumbent mayor had made the runoff with me, it would have been a much tougher fight, because I wouldn't have had that $500,000 in the runoff. It was all of his supporters who switched over to my side that allowed me to have the money in the runoff. So that was and if he had been able to do that, perhaps he would not have taken me that seriously.
We have microphones on either side, and if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, just please come up to the microphone and try to avoid making a speech and just ask your question. Unless you're running for something, and then we'll all start collecting money. I wanted to hear these figures on money, because when we talk about finances being the difficult part for women, I'm not sure if everyone is aware of how much it costs to run.
Because of that, too, you have groups like the Emily Group.
Emily is a women's political action committee, and it's an acronym. It stands for Early Money is Like Yeast.
That's great.
Yeah, and those kinds of groups are forming, and there's some local groups that spin off of Emily, because they recognize that women do have difficulty, and so they're concentrating, and the way they do it is so that you can give money for that candidate of your choosing. You just don't have to just give money in general. And they're on some sort of a tour across the country trying to get memberships. So if they come here to Boston and you hear about it, you should attend some of the functions and find out more about Emily. They were the ones that were very instrumental in helping Barbara, was in Mikowski, in Maryland, get elected to the Senate.
Over here.
Mayor Wittmeyer, what would have been the reaction if you had chose not to participate in the fashion photograph session this morning?
Oh, it would have been okay. There was a time when people at the newspaper would have gotten very upset with me about it, but I think I've been in office long enough now that we've dealt with all those issues, and I've done enough of the fun and games things that the press wanted me to do, that now I don't have to do every one of them.
Is that what's your decision process as a woman beyond this particular instance, when you're asked a question, when you're asked to participate in something and you don't think it's appropriate as a mayor or as a candidate, what factors into your decision?
Well, when I started out, it was very, very important to me to maintain that business-like image, as I mentioned, and so the press constantly wanted me to do all kinds of weird things that they would enjoy taking pictures of, and they constantly, wanted to have pictures of me in shorts and riding a bicycle and whatever it was, and I just constantly said no. And quite frankly, that became a big issue. It became an image of, what is it that they say about Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Maiden, and that's what they were calling me. And it became such an issue that in my 85 re-election campaign, which was a very hard-fought campaign, and I was afraid I might lose it, I said, well, so much for all that, I'll do whatever they want me to do. And I did, and they loved it, and the whole city loved me, and they re-elected me.
You do what you have to do. If it's a disadvantage to be a woman, take advantage of what it's like to be a woman. Over here.
Yeah, I just want to ask, is the risk of having more women in elected office that the status of that office will go down as, for example, in America you could cite the profession of teaching. Probably the status of that has dropped because it's been so inundated by women. In the Soviet Union you could cite the profession of being a physician. Do you see signs of that already? Perhaps the kind of flack that you got about the housewives mafia as an indication. I don't know.
Oh, I'll just comment briefly because
Yeah,
just on women and blacks. There have been some discussion about the disintegration of our urban centers, and that the blacks will inherit them as mayors because they seem to be on their way out, and that's just an additional challenge and a myth. But there is discussion that because this is why you have so many mayors, black mayors of the large cities. I would just use this opportunity. I was concerned what you said about
So
Okay, go on.
But in fact, you're saying it's true.
I'm saying that's a discussion, and it could be one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. If the discussion is believed, and I think it is our responsibility to respond in positive ways and say that's not so. It's that the challenges of the urban centers have become so great that they need giants to meet it.
Okay. I want to agree with what Carrie says. I've heard a little bit of that discussion. In Houston, we have what's sometimes known as a strong mayor form of government, which means that instead of having the city council go out and appoint a city manager, the mayor has the management responsibilities for the city. And there's been a little of that behind the scenes, kind of the old-timers saying, my God, we've got a woman who's mayor, and we may have a black who's mayor, and we really better get the management away from the mayor before all this happens and figure out how to set up a professional city manager. So there has been some of that kind of talk.
I guess the end of the question is, how do you combat that? Is there any way to ward this off?
I think the only way you can combat it is simply by action. You've got to prove yourself once you're in office, and it really doesn't matter if you're a school teacher or if you're a mayor or whatever you are. You're judged on your performance and on your actions. And I think it puts a responsibility that should be there anyway on your shoulders to do the best job you can and to set an example so people can't say, well, gee, Charlotte went to heck because they had a woman mayor. That's a responsibility that every individual, no matter what you're doing, should assume. And that's the only thing I can see just off the top of my head that would help to overcome.
I think it has to do with timing, too. I think that it's the time for women to take hold of these kinds of things in blacks, and it's just timing, and the timing is right now.
There's a relatively famous Harvard professor who is no longer here named Ethel Klein, who hypothesized in a book called Gender Politics that when women reach the height of any institution that was heretofore male, unions, politics, whatever, that the luster, and some would call it power, disintegrates from that arena. But she says that what it is that women don't need luster to do a good job, that the men have created this glitz and glamour that looks like power but is not necessarily strength. So I hope I've quoted her correctly. Over here.
That's true.
You've all referred to the unique position of women in office, or at least in campaigns, and to the unusual media attention which results from that. Obviously, we've made a great deal of progress insofar as sheer numbers go in the past few decades. Do you think that progress, as far as getting more women into office, will continue? And how would you suggest encouraging more women to run, and at what level?
I think the easiest way for a female to start running for office is at an entry level, you might say, in a local community, whether it's a city council or a school board, or I don't know some of the terminology of what different systems are. because I don't think maybe it's as threatening in some cases. In other words, it's more accepted because they're not, like for a mayor, it's more threatening because it's an image thing rather than just a position, as one of many. You're out there by yourself. And really, as I say, that's the way it's happened in Charlotte. Just a lot of females on the school board and also on county commission and then on city council as well.
I think there's going to have to be some organizational support to help educate women candidates and encourage more women to run. The reason there are not more women in office today is because there are not more women running. And that is quite frankly it. I mean, women candidates are in the minority, and women holding office are going to continue to be in the minority until more women are running. And I know that I got a great deal of encouragement and support from the Women's Political Caucus, and very much feel that my political career got its start because the National Women's Political Caucus chose in 1973 to hold its national convention in Houston, and I kind of wandered in and got hooked on the whole thing, and out of that grew an organization, which out of that grew my candidacy, and I might never have run had that organization of support not been there, and even if I had run, I might not have had the wherewithal to win if I had not had that support. So I think organizations which encourage women to take those risks and to prepare themselves to be successful when they take them are very, very important.
I think there needs to be more discussion about the definition of power as women and as blacks and folks who have been not necessarily in the mainstream of our nation have a reluctance to take on the helm of power and have that kind of a fear of failure. And as women, sometimes we don't take risks because we don't think we're going to have that many opportunities. So I think in discussions with women groups that we have to talk more about power and what power is about. The other thing, I don't necessarily subscribe to the traditional route. I think sometimes you have to leapfrog, and that has to do with risk-taking too. Sometimes when women get involved in boards of educations and city councils, they don't necessarily have a lot of mobility. They remain in those positions, and they become more in those positions rather than just maybe leapfrog into, a mayor or a congresswoman or what have you. And so I would suggest that those are two things that should be considered when we as elected officials talk to women groups.
Over here.
I was wondering if you could comment on something that Mayor Merrick mentioned, and that is, I see a dilemma that it's very important to have more women running for office, yet we want women to run as individuals and not as women. So should you ask women in a partisan race who are of the other party to vote for you because you're a woman and go against maybe some party principles that they've worked for throughout their political careers?
Very interesting question. I don't really know, in our area that would be a hard thing to do, simply because it's been so structured for so long it wouldn't happen overnight. You go back to the key of being qualified. The person's got to be qualified to handle the job once they're in there, because if they weren't and were just running as a female without the necessary qualifications, you'd set things back how many years, if they didn't perform once they were in office. I really don't know.
I have the privilege of running nonpartisan, and while I'm a Democrat, I can tell you I ask Republicans to vote for me every single time, and I ask them to vote for me because I hope that I present a platform that they as individuals can support. And I know that there are more Republican women than there are Republican men who vote for me. That's all their own, that's based on their own feelings about it. I don't go to them and tell them they should vote for me just because I'm a woman or that they should somehow go against things they believe in. I think, again, you have to present a platform that the majority of the people can support regardless of their party affiliation.
After I get past the qualifications and all that jazz, I talk about representative government. And I say that we have to have the kind of government that represents the kinds of people that they serve. And there's nowhere in America that there's all white males. There's always a blend. So I talk about representative government all the time.
That's good. Well, one of the questioners talked about the fact that we made great strides, but at no level of government are we higher than 15.5% of women elected to office. We were talking earlier at dinner about the fact that we don't even know how many women mayors we have because no one even keeps those statistics, which shows you how much people care about that issue. In terms of mentoring other people, because you've all mentioned that you are role models to others, what kind of help can you give to other women who are interested in running for office?
Well, of course, first by doing, but then secondly, by encouraging other women to run, by giving them the support that they need. Like Kathy mentioned, the mayor of Dallas saying it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Kathy's having set the example, and I'm sure she watched all along the way in the things that Kathy did that worked and didn't work and so forth. Reaching back, and I found in my years, I've been in the business world all my adult life, and the majority of it's been spent in dealing with top-level management, CEOs, presidents of companies, etc. And I found that women in general don't reach back to help other women. And that's always puzzled me. And I really don't think women like other women. And I've said this before to women's groups, and people sit there and nod their heads, and it doesn't matter if they're, 20 years old or if they're 85 years old, all the gamut. And that's always puzzled me because we talk about one thing as females. We say, yes, we want to help other women, and yes, we're supportive of women. But when you put it on the line and it comes right down to doing it as an individual, I mean, you and I, people don't do it. And I find that very interesting.
Other comments?
Well, I think there's a lot that we can do to help. I mean, obviously, being in office, and if we do well, I mean, that helps in itself. I think we need to go further than that to help other women. I try to do that whenever I'm called upon to visit with somebody or to ask staff members or to ask campaign supporters to visit with someone. I was at the Texas Municipal League meeting recently, and the woman who's the mayor pro tem of Greenville, Texas, a small town with a black woman mayor pro tem, came up to me and said, I'm going to run for mayor. I'd really like to sit down and talk with you about it. And I said, of course, let's do that. Let's sit down and go over what it's going to take for your campaign to succeed. Because if there's some small thing like that I could do to share my experience with her and give her an edge, well, I would certainly want to do that.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
No, just very quickly, that, as mayor, one of the things that we've just begun is a permanent commission on the status of Harvard women, and to appoint as many women as I can to those kinds of commissions within the administration so that they can get some exposure to what politics, at least in municipal, are about.
Yes.
It could be that I'm not thinking of all the possibilities, but when I think of a lot of the women who've reached top national office, Congress, the Senate, with the exceptions perhaps of Mrs. Ferraro and Mrs. Schroeder, I think of women who tend to be politically conservative. People like Jean Kirkpatrick, who's in the administration, Elizabeth Dole is in the administration. Is there a correlation, or am I just not finding enough liberal women in my memory?
Good question. Well, there is the senator from Maryland, Barbara Mikulski, who's not very conservative.
And ran against a woman, by the way. One of the things that there's a recent book out about the parties, and it talks about how the party structure changed, and maybe you can respond to this in terms of how the parties have moved women along. And the Republican Party made a conscious effort about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and it wasn't, the Democrats didn't do it until after Chicago, the famous Chicago Democratic Convention, where they made changes within the party structure on how women within the party could move up. And so the Republican Party really did advance more women within the party structure. So that's helped. Would you agree?
I didn't realize that.
Speaking of the woman.
And also, as you say, we're talking about the national level, then at a local level where we've seen women, of all parties. So.
Mm-hmm.
I know males make the decisions about a lot of things, and they like people who look like them and act like them. That's one of the reasons. Where is he?
Yeah.
It wasn't important anyway. That's okay.
No, I think it was definitely a good point.
No, I was just commenting that in many instances in the national position like Kilpatrick and Choose United Nations, that sometimes, males feel more comfortable with women who espouse some of the same kinds of doctrines that they do and who kind of, look and act like them, so they're more comfortable. It's just like in the corporate world, it's the comfort level. With whom are you most comfortable? Usually people who act and look like you.
Thank you.
That's always bugged me, and I've tried to be myself, and by doing that, by your actions and your knowledge in what you do to show the strength and aggressiveness you need without going overboard in that direction. But yet I like to be female. I still like to have somebody hold a door open for me. I'll open my own door, but it's nice to have somebody, to be female and enjoy that privilege. So I would just say don't be extreme one way or the other if it's not you, if you're not natural in doing it, because you won't accomplish your end result. People see through it. They know that you're really not the person you're trying to be.
I agree with that.
Carrie? Any comments?
No, I think what Sue said, you just have to be yourself, and you have to realize you just don't have the, you are going to be in a fishbowl. So that you do have to not go through red lights. Really, you just have to be much more aware of the kinds of things you do, even the small things. You have to be much, much more aware of them. And I just realized that since I'm just, really brand new too. And my friends always say, because, I pause at a stoplight and, stop sign and go through. But all those little kinds of things you have to be very conscious of, because you are always in the spotlight. Yeah. And all the little things, if you begin to abuse them even a little, will pile up. So I think that's the difference at being a woman than a man in a position, because we are new, that you have to be very, very careful of all the little amenities that are not sometimes so important when you're a private citizen.
Very true. People are constantly watching you. One thing that amazes me is that since I've been elected, now I go to the grocery store and do my shopping like everybody else, but people stop you in the grocery store and they'll say, "What are you doing here doing your grocery shopping?" Like you don't eat and you don't do normal things just because you're elected. You're somebody different all of a sudden, and that just tickles the dickens out of me.
Pat Schroeder said recently, don't commit adultery while smoking pot and crib while you do it. Yes.
The point was made that women candidates, voters are reluctant to vote for women candidates, and at the same time have higher expectations of women candidates. Do you think that time will reverse this dynamic, or is it something that women candidates are subject to for always?
The only thing that will reverse it is for women candidates not to be in the minority anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want the expectations to, decline. I want the expectations to stay high. I think as women, we have to set, the standard and take that responsibility. So I would hate to ever see it. It's a burden, but it's a choice you make when you decide to run. And I think it would be helpful if this high expectation was spread around.
I like that.
Here. That's good. Yes.
We perceived this female candidates for whatever office, the voters would perceive you of making up a government more free of corruption as opposed to a male counterpart.
Well, your question was, is that what the voters perceive, that,
yes,
that women are going to clean up government? I think in many cases that that is true, and I think that the reason that perception is true is that women are usually outsiders instead of insiders, and running as reform candidates rather than establishment candidates, and therefore women are perceived to be the ones who are there to clean up government and not to allow for any corruption. I suppose that when all things are equal, there'll be just as many corrupt women politicians as there are corrupt men politicians.
Yeah, this isn't exactly on that subject, but it brought something to mind with what Kathy was saying. I think there's a real opportunity for women in political office and political life to to be more, to bring people together more, and to, it's not really mothering in the sense that you raise your kids, but when you're raising kids, you're constantly trying to get them to get along and this kind of thing. And I really think that women have a good chance now of setting some examples along those lines, because I know in our community there have been instances where there have been standoffs between different governments, and it's really nothing more than personality clashes with the individuals and somebody's ego getting in the way and saying, they don't want to give in to make this happen. And I don't think you find that. I'm generalizing, which is terrible to do, but I really don't think that is as true in women. I think women are more ready to try and bring people together. And that could be a very distinct advantage overall in the future.
I agree, because that's one of my campaign things, talked about coalition building. And it's something that you said earlier too, Sue. Women are more concerned with results than recognition.
That's right.
And we don't have the privilege of being part of the old boys network where all the deals are made. So that perception of not being as corrupt is pretty positive right now.
Yes.
Doesn't matter. Can you hear me? I was in politics for about, in the state legislature for about 15 years, and I was a councilman at large for 8 years. And I had 3 very, very active teenage boys. They were small and then they grew up. And I felt that was the hardest thing I had to deal with. These 3 extremely different people, and if they did anything wrong, like I introduced a bill to decriminalize marijuana, and my 14-year-old immediately went into English class and opened up his package of marijuana for everybody to see. And no one blamed his father. I would just like to know if any of you had trouble being, you are perceived as a woman and you are perceived as the person who has the most responsibility for your children.
Where are you from, by the way?
I'm from New Hampshire. We have a lot of women in the state legislature. On the other hand, in the city council, I was the first actually even in the state legislature too, I was one of the first ordinary wife, mother image. There were other women, but they were one of the guys.
I never experienced that. I think you always live with a certain amount of fear and wondering whether one of your kids is going to do something, that would end up on the front page of the paper, because you can rest assured it would end up on the front page of the paper where it wouldn't with someone else, no question. And that brings me to another question that I used to get asked when our children were still at home. They're all gone now. And that was, who's raising your children? And that was a very frustrating thing to go through, because, that balance that you have to maintain all the time. But again, perception in people's minds.
Comments?
Well, I don't have children, but I think that it is unquestionably true that the members of your family are subject to scrutiny if you are in public office. My father and my brother and all of those folks complain about that all the time, that they are subject to a lot of scrutiny because I'm in office, but I'm not too sure there's anything that can be done about it other than me not being in office anymore.
Yes.
I'd like to come back to the issue of women not helping each other get up to the top, especially in the corporate world. I've heard kind of 2 explanations. One is that there are so few women at the top that they're very jealous of their positions and are afraid they'll be threatened by other women, and also that the fact that they don't help each other has something just to do with the nature of women in their upbringing. I'd like to know what your thoughts on that.
Sports people tell you that it's because the guys learn sports and it's teamwork. And sociologists have said it's because girls are taught to dislike other girls because they're competition for the guys. So we have to stop distrusting each other and start doing teamwork.
I haven't found it to be true. Women have helped me every step along the way in my political career, and I have tried to do the same thing. I just really have not seen that to be the case.
That's great.
My largest support has been from women, and to the woman who asked about our children, my son, my first campaign, was very, very helpful. So when he was in the middle of the campaign, he also got the effect of how he should behave because we were in the middle of a campaign. But the women have been very supportive. Sue had a different experience, but nevertheless, I just believe sometimes, we believe what people want us to believe, and sometimes in the corporate world, that when there are few women at the top, the men who surround that particular woman, make her feel very special, and if there's more than one, then she won't be so special, and so, you have those kind of dynamics at play, because the whole issue of power is of great concern to me, and people who have power try to keep it in a variety of ways, and you keep it by keeping an exclusive club and screening out those who are not a part of that inner circle.
Can you go to a microphone so we can get it on tape? Can you ask your question and I'll repeat it.
I talk loud enough, I believe. I was just wondering whether you could suggest some specific things an institute like Harvard or rather the Institute of Politics could do to help women run for office.
The question was how Harvard and the Institute of Politics could help women run for office.
Well, one thing you could do is have some type of a seminar or training session for women who are interested in running for office, who have, I don't know how you'd find them. That's one problem, I guess. But like you're doing for why we're here as mayors, like I call it mayor school, teaching you how to be a mayor. And you could do similar things with preparing women to run for office, the expectations, the pitfalls, the problems, it really, I think, would be very beneficial, because most of us just kind of jump in and you learn by doing, and after you do it a few times, like anything else, it gets easy, but the first time you really struggle with it. And that, to me, would be extremely helpful.
Other comments?
Well, last weekend, the Democratic Party in Texas put on an all-day conference for women who were thinking of running for office, or women who were managing campaigns or wanting to manage campaigns. It was basically a workshop on running campaigns and running for office for women statewide, and I felt it was a very worthwhile thing for the party to do. Needless to say, I think that could be done by educational institutions as well.
They could integrate some courses into the school, like political science, expand it more for elective office. When I go to schools and they have career days, they never have any booths that say politicians.
Yes.
I've worked for several candidates who have tried to make the leap from local or statewide office to the U.S. House and Senate, and they've been unsuccessful. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what problems you see with that particular jump, and also if you could share with us if you have any particular plans for higher office.
Well, I would think the first thing is the money aspect. When you're looking at a state or a national office, you're talking about such tremendous dollars, and if you haven't built up a good support network among your constituents in the area that you would be serving, which is not always the easiest thing to do, I think it would be very difficult just to make that unless you've got tremendous party support or some other organization. Like Kathy said, she's had excellent support from women's groups, somebody who can really get behind you and give you that support you need. Off the top of my head, I really don't have anything. And I never had a goal to be mayor. I mean, this isn't something that I started out my life, or even, 10 years ago thought I'd ever be mayor. I'm not that type of a person. I was not raised, and we talked about this earlier, when I was growing up, when you got out of high school, you did one of three things. You either got married, you became a teacher, or you became a nurse. And that very simply was the breadth of my generation's career involvement. And you didn't have all the resources that you do today for females to know that you can get grants and aids and you can get all kinds of loans and other things, that you could go to school and do these things on your own with support from the outside. That just wasn't available. I came from a small town and a small school, etc. So you didn't know what the possibilities and so forth were, and we didn't set goals in the same way. Females today, can set career goals when they're young and they start out and then they achieve them, which I guess makes it easier in the sense that you're constantly building some type of support network along the way because you know where you're going. But I have no at this point, no desire and no plans to do anything else. I really don't.
Let me say on the question of moving up, this is all, my opinion because I haven't done it. The first time I ran for office, I ran for a citywide office. And the second time I ran for office, again, it was a citywide office. But it seems to me that for anyone to move from a smaller jurisdiction, whether it's a school board or city council or state legislative position, to a larger one, it takes two things. It takes expanding an organization into that larger area, and it takes the amount of money that's necessary to run in that larger area. I want to say one other thing, though. The question was asked in terms of people moving up from local government into, big important things like state and national office. And, I represent a city that includes 6 congressional districts. And it seems to me that local government is awfully important, particularly when you are looking at these major urban areas around our city. Most of everything that happens that affects our citizens happens in local government. So I'm not sure why people keep coming up to me from everywhere and saying, well, gosh, when are you going to get out of that city government and do something big and important? Seems to me like being mayor of a city with 1.8 million people, and it is probably one responsibility that's larger than most of those offices you're talking about.
Yes.
I'd like to explore this theme of the role of the party organizations in the electability of women. I come from a city where the party endorsement used to be essential for seeking city council or mayoral office. Especially on the Democratic side, the registration is heavily Democratic. That process was largely viewed as a barrier to women seeking those offices because it was a twofold process where you sought the endorsement of party officials and then that was ratified in a primary and you went on to virtual guaranteed election in November. That's changed somewhat in our city, and the value of the endorsement seems to have declined somewhat. Can you talk a little bit about your advice for prospective women candidates as it would relate to their working through the party organization seeking that endorsement? And second of all, how your relationship to the party to which you belong may have changed now that you're a mayor?
In the city of Hartford, the state of Connecticut, we voted to not have the party lever any longer. And in the last election, we did not have a party lever, and that made a real difference. And the way that the folks voted in probably will dilute the strength of a party endorsement as we go down, because you just don't do that kind of automatic thing any longer. And I see that as very healthy. The second question was my relationship with very shaky.
Do you think you need to shore it up? Do you think you need to shore up that relationship?
I don't know if I need to shore it up. I probably need to develop what I call before the positional power, so that when we sit down at the table, I'm viewed more as an equal.
I think that probably each area is different around the country, and it depends on the strength of party organizations and so forth. From my own perspective, having the support of the party is important because there are other doors that are open to you that wouldn't be opened on other levels of government for support or for money or for campaigning or whatever it may be, and that is crucial. In my own particular case, I see my role changing since I'm elected as mayor only in the sense that I believe it will help the Republican Party because I'm a very fiscally conservative person. I have always run that way. That's just the way I am. But yet I have a very large social conscience in the sense that I get very involved in homeless and housing and all these other issues that normally people say, well, Republicans don't care about that. That's not true. It's perception again, but by the same token, I see myself as having a beautiful opportunity to show people by action that a Republican can get involved and can be concerned about the needs of the people we're supposed to be taking care of. And I don't necessarily see it all being done as government doing it. I see it as public-private cooperation, and a lot of it being done by the private sector with cities having limited roles. And one of the reasons being city resources are dwindling, federal money, state monies are disappearing, and it's going to become more and more important for cities to be able to stand on their own and not to have to rely on those monies. And again, that's calling on the private sector.
I like that comment, Sue. I see my opportunity as showing people that a Democrat can be a fiscal conservative.
Right. That's good.
But as to the party endorsement, in Texas, we really don't have that kind of formal party endorsement where the party leadership decides who gets to be the anointed one to run. We have a very pluralistic society, even in our party primaries, which are very much open and controlled at the ballot box, and I think that that's a pretty good way to run government.
One last question.
Yes, in your positions which you now hold and position which you're about to take, you'll have the opportunity to bring more women into the political system through appointments in your staff and your cabinets. I'm wondering if, particularly for those that have held the office in the past, whether you have felt under a particular obligation or pressure to make appointments of women to your posts, cabinet positions and staff, and if you've taken flack for not having done so.
Well, I have not felt that I was under an obligation or pressure. I have appointed women to positions that women never held before, and that's been important to me because it's one of the things I believe in, that the idea that the city of Houston should have a planning commission, which has always been all men, makes no more sense than the idea that the city of Houston should have a city council that's all men. And so I have appointed women not from any pressure, and if I hadn't, would I have taken flack? Probably.
How about you two? Have you made plans for your appointments?
I'm not in yet.
Yeah. But we're going to call you next week and see how you
I go back to the same thing. If there's a female that's qualified for the job, I would definitely appoint her. But I would not go ahead and appoint someone knowing full well that they weren't qualified or didn't have the capabilities of quickly becoming qualified, because that's a detriment, again, to everything that we're talking about tonight.
Well, I think that we've dispelled some myths tonight. I hope we've made you all realize that there still are a lot of needs out there to increase the pool of candidates. The Kennedy School and the Institute of Politics wants to take that step and to establish a clearinghouse for women candidates and make it possible for this pool to widen and get broader. We've also dispelled the myth that we can't laugh at ourselves and that women don't have a sense of humor, and that they could all be an attractive bunch and smart too. We have to be better, more powerful, stronger, wiser, and no runs in the hose. Thank you all for coming.
There's someone at the...
Do you want to ask your question?
Hello. Looking at the three of you, I see three completely different personalities, and it's great to see. I just wanted to say that having sat through this forum, and I work in the corporate world, and I've experienced this process of not being allowed up or being held back by a female above. And my question is, how would you go about that, getting past that as women? How do you get your fellow girls to say, hey, come on?
There again, I go back to just you as an individual and each person, each one, trying to do their part to do it. If enough people start doing it, it will happen. But I don't know how you can how you can force it on somebody who's already there who isn't willing to be open to it. I think a lot of it's going to be up to people who are in the process of moving up to be able to become aware and more open to that, and to help those who are under them following them. But as far as breaking through the barrier that's already there in a lot of large corporations, I just don't see it happening, unfortunately.
Well,
in some
more power to all of you, because you look gorgeous, and I like the glamour, I like the hat, and I like the conservativeness.
Yeah, let me, I want to make one comment about, how do you, I don't know if it would work, but I was just thinking about it, an end run, if you have a woman who's your supervisor who is, hindering your, moving, then you maybe should get a male mentor.
That's something I have to
Thank
discuss
you very
with
much.